Thank you for joining me, Mark Grixti, for this invitation to explore deeper together into the divinity, science, spaciousness, and intuition of hurt and healing with awe in trauma.
In terms of just how the nervous system works and the rest of the body systems work, the person's system is always processing. Okay, it's not like when they come in with us, that's when they have processing, and when they leave, the processing stops. You know, people who never go to therapy, never go to brain spotting therapy, are always processing. That's how the system works. But the processing for most of us, and especially for our clients, ends up being very inefficient, ends up being very inhibited. And my postulation is that it has to do with dissociative survival barriers that arise from the client developmentally. And this dissociative network that builds from there creates different, they're not literal blocks, they're more contextual blocks, but where the system is protecting itself in a very primitive or primal way, in such a way that they can't really process through traumas that neurophysiologically, subcortically, they've been carrying with them, frozen, unprocessed. So how we receive and hold this frame and constantly are shaping it and reshaping it helps that system to more efficiently process than it has been, with all of these dissociative barriers inhibiting the system, inhibiting the process. I know I'm getting kind of heady with this for the moment, but in everything we do, and watch for what I'm talking about in the micro video sessions and the microanalysis of it. Watch for it in the demos that I do. Watch for this in the practicums that you do. So again, in the neuro-experiential model, the client brings the frame into the first session and each subsequent session, and we are mindfully aware of this. We're waiting for this. We know that when they walk into our office or come on the screen, that they're there with the frame of their healing needs, or of that which is inhibiting them from healing or growing or recovering, and that we mindfully receive this frame. How do we do it? We ask the client in the first session, tell me what brings you here. Tell me what led you to seek out this help. What they say right from the beginning is the expression, the articulation of the frame. And we need to be mindfully aware of it. Even before they speak the words, on a nonverbal basis, on a subcortical basis, on a somatic basis, they're presenting their frame to us, and we are receiving it, subcortically, and we are receiving it somatically. And we need to be mindfully aware of this, But when they give us their first statement of why they are coming from us and what they need help with, they are articulating the frame. And it's really important for us to be mindfully aware of this. Brainspotting is definitely mindfulness-based, but in its own unique, particular way. And again, the idea that that recognizing, attuning to, receiving, and holding the frame with them, and then shaping it, is going to lead to a processing inside of the frame, is also something for us to be mindfully aware of. And what we guide the client to do as they're processing is to notice what comes up and notice what comes next and notice where it goes from there. So we are guiding them to be aware of what they experience inside of the frame as they are processing. So we're mutually observing their process, them from the inside and us from the outside. By the way, there is no such thing as a client not processing. There's no such thing as nothing happening. There's no such thing as a client being blocked. There's no such thing as a client doing inefficient or irrelevant processing. Okay, this is again part of the deep mindfulness base of brain spotting and the deep neuro-experiential base of brain spotting. Processing is processing is processing, and processing is always a manifestation and an expression of the system's healing itself, even if it's happening on a micro basis, even if it's happening on what appears to be a very gradual basis. The idea that a client can be blocked or that it's blank or that it's not happening or it's not working is impossible when you understand the nervous system, when you understand neuro experience. If you understand dissociative networks and dissociative barriers, you will understand that the processing, which is always seeking to find the unhealed trauma, you know, the lost trauma, the blocked trauma, the dissociated trauma, the processing is always seeking it out. But as it does it starts to approach the dissociative barriers that in a very primal way emerged to help the client, protect the client, to help the client to survive. And when that happens, there can be the false impression that the processing is slowing down. What it really is doing is it is getting close to the barrier that protects the unhealed trauma, that protects what was encapsulated when the client was 5 years old or 3 years old or 1 year old or 2 months old. And it gives what is the illusion of slowing down or being blocked, but what's really happening is a very dynamic process. Okay, that's why we say to our clients, just give yourself time and space and see what happens, and I will be as patient with you as you need me to be. That takes off the client this expectation they have about their process and puts them more back in curiosity mode and patience mode and mindfulness mode. I want to flip and talk a little bit about dissociation now from a neuro-experiential point of view. And we talk about dissociative barriers, we talk about dissociative capsules. That's all a very literal way about talking about something that is not literal at all. You know, Robert Scare in his book, The Trauma Spectrum and The Body Bears the Burden, talks about dissociative capsules. He's a neurologist. He wasn't a therapist. It helps us to understand the phenomena, but it is not literal like that in any way. There's truly not any actual dissociative capsules or dissociative barriers, even though I use these terms because it's a way for us to communicate about this. It is everything that happens in the nervous system. It's the whole brain, the whole nervous system operating together. And if you could actually try to find these dissociative barriers or capsules, they don't really exist. It's something that the nervous system intuitively knows how to do. Okay. And I've been searching and researching for a long time to try to understand what this phenomena is so that we can understand it differently. And in my research about this, I came across something which is called sensory gating. Sensory gating is in our nervous system, in our deep nervous system. It's very autonomic and it's very thalamic, you know, with a thalamus also, but it's really all aspects of the brain working. If we didn't have a filtration system, that filters out what's going on inside of ourselves physiologically before we even get to emotionally. If we didn't have a filtration system, we would be bombarded constantly with everything that's going on inside of our bodies, inside of our nervous systems. If we were aware of our heart beating and the blood circulating throughout our body and circulating back to the heart all the time, if that wasn't filtered out by the sensory gating, okay, we couldn't function. Just our respiration. If that wasn't being filtered out from us, and right now, if I said to you, how much are you aware of your heart beating and blood circulating throughout your body? You'd say, well, no, not really. Even if I think about it, the only way, is if I put my hand on my heart, if I feel my pulse, that's how you feel it. That's where you break down that the social, the sensory gating. It goes to everything that's going on inside of ourselves. Almost all of it gets filtered out. Okay, but here's really one of the crucial questions, one of the key questions with this is, how does the nervous system know how to do this? How does it know how to use sensory gating to filter out most of what's going on inside of ourselves, so that we can feel relatively calm, grounded, and balanced, and connected to that which we need to be connected with instead of flooding? Okay. It is something that the system knows how to do, and it is mammalian. We can't have conversations with most mammals about this, but the sensory gating goes on inside of mammals also, so that whatever that mammalian consciousness for that particular mammal is, again, it's able to have some sense of homeostasis. Okay. And the breakdown of sensory gating leads to dysregulation. It can be profound dysregulation, and it can be dysregulation to the point of freezing, not being able to function. So, to me, the systemic capacity for social gating, which is hardwired and purely instinctual, I believe is the mechanism by which dissociation operates. And I think that and literally the sensory gating is a form of dissociation, but it is highly adaptive, highly developed, and it is totally necessary. Okay. And it in and of itself is not based on trauma. It's based on functionality. It's based on being able to be present in our environment with the limited amount of things that we need to be present with. Okay. And again, I believe that threat to our survival, whatever that entails, and the more early developmental that it is, okay, brings up the capacity for sensory gating to filter it out. Whether it's to filter it out for a moment, or for 5 seconds, or a minute, or an hour, or a lifetime. Okay, it is highly based on survival. It is highly adaptive, and it is incredibly instinctual and intuitive. What happens from this is that this sensory gating allows us again to dissociate. Okay, dissociation is a form of filtration. It's filtering out the noise and filtering out the all the sensory aspects. Trauma is highly sensory. It's what we see, it's what we hear, it's what we feel in our bodies, what we smell, what we taste. And flashbacks are highly sensory. By the way, the sensory is central to the neuro-experiential model. And I will get to that. If not today, I'll get to that probably tomorrow. If you have read my keynote address on the neuro-experiential model that I gave back in July 2021, none of this piece of of sensory gating is there. So it's relatively new. So you're getting, the most up-to-date conceptualizations of this. Inherent in what I'm saying is that the system knows how to dissociate in order to maintain homeostasis and in order to survive. Okay. And again, it gives us a different conceptualization about what dissociation is and where it comes from. Okay. And also, the system using this social gating, sensory gating filtration, okay, once it does it, it tends to become, it often becomes fixed in the system, okay, which means that certain aspects of who we are and where we have been remain inaccessible to us. And because dissociation, I call it survival dissociation or an adaptive dissociation, because it happened to us early in our developments, okay, it is the idea of systemically letting it go, letting down these barriers, turning off the filtration system or tuning it down, is threatening to the system. Okay. It's threatening because the system has learned this is what I need to do to survive. This is one of the biggest challenges for us in doing therapy, the biggest challenges for us in doing brain spotting, and the biggest challenges for us in doing, in working with the evolved survival adaptive dissociative networks. When the system learns this is what I need to do to survive, it is very resistant, and I don't use this in any psychodynamic way. It is very resistant towards giving up these survival filtration barriers. That's why, it can take so long, even with brain spotting. That's why a person can, there's absolutely nothing maladaptive about dissociation. Okay, this is again one of the biggest things that I'm trying to address in this model. What's maladaptive is our society and our societies that allow threats to be done, meted out to young people, to young children, to babies. Okay, and what's going on now? The warfare all around the world, is doing this to children and to young children. It is a miracle that their systems can intuitively and reflexively filter out and what looks like encapsulate, these experiences so that the rest of their nervous system can maintain its sense of homeostasis, balance, and regulation. But the system finds it very threatening to let down these barriers, to let down this sensory gating, this experiential gating. I want to now kind of just that comment about the maladaptive. The Western lens has this idea that through the science of psychology and through research and what we call evidence-based practice, all these things are very Western concepts. Okay, and the population of the West, we're just talking about Europe and North America, particularly United States, is 1 billion. the population of the world is 8 billion. So 7 billion of our population, okay, are not Western, okay, and they're not defined by the Western, okay. The Western is defined by the rest of the world. But the lens, this Western lens, 1 billion in relation to 7 billion, the Western lens says that this is the way it is. And this idea of evidence-based practice, which is phenomenally Western, and ignoring, rejecting, and respecting the Asian, the African, the South American, the indigenous. Okay, this Western wisdom is just hundreds of years old. The wisdom in the rest of the world is thousands of years old. Okay, healing through a Western lens is narrow, and it has its power. But literally, it's come down to what we call evidence-based practice. Okay, which means it's got to fit this Western lens. Okay, and if it doesn't, you have no evidence, is the implication. That the 7 billion people around the world whose knowledge and wisdom and practice has been evolved over millennia, you have no evidence. The hubris with that is off the charts. I'm going to bring this back again to what we call the diagnostic. The diagnostic, if you look in the diagnostic nomenclature, and if you look in the DSM-5 and other versions of this, virtually every diagnosis has at the end of it the word disorder. Okay? Disorder, malfunction, maladaptive. Well, if you, and how do you come up with these diagnoses? It's symptom clusters. Okay, if you have 5 out of 7, for instance, of these symptom clusters, then the person meets criteria, okay, or criterion for this diagnosis. Dissociative identity disorder, okay. Anxiety disorder, panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, depressive disorder, okay. What is complete, and this is the Western view. It's the way I look at it and what it looks like from the outside and what I'm seeing that determines what it is, as opposed to what brain spotting and other modalities, there are other modalities that are developmental. Okay, the idea is it's not a disorder. It's a reflection of what the system has been through developmentally. Okay, and it's not a disorder. It's an adaptation. It's a survival adaptation to an environment and to a world that is the ways that it ideally and morally and spiritually should not be. Dissociative identity disorder. I call it, instead of DID, I call it DIA, dissociative identity adaptation. And it's a survival adaptation. The system that has generational roots to it, that has gestational roots to it in utero, that has the profound birth experience, that has the profound attachment experience, which is, which starts, pre-birth, and we can look at attachment in a much more historical developmental lens. When we look at development generationally, gestationally, birth-wise, attachment-wise, early life, first few days, weeks, months, and years of life. Okay, what comes to us, what looks symptomatic, is a reflection of the response to threat, the systemic response to threat that happens systemically. Okay. Dissociative, DIA, dissociative identity adaptation, is a system that survived because of its intuitive capacity for sensory gating. Okay. There is not one thing that is disordered about that. What is disordered is what created it, and what is disordered is how the wounds that this person is carrying make it hard for them to function internally and to function externally. I want to actually just do an exercise right now, and it's an exercise in being able to be mindful of or have a sense of what sensory gating is. Okay. And so, and it's just going to be for a minute, 2 minutes, whatever. I'll see how it unfolds. I want all of you to choose one of your body functions. Okay. Not respiration, because respiration, when you focus on it, you can observe it. But I want you to choose either circulation or digestion, just one of those two, or you can do both, or if something else comes to you, you could choose that. And I want you to just be mindful of the fact that it's going on inside of you. Be mindful, again, that your heart is pumping and the blood is going throughout the body to all the cells, and then from all the cells back to the heart. Or if it's digestion, that again, whatever you have eaten most recently is still in your system, and that your body is breaking it down. Again, whether it's from your stomach or it's found its way towards your intestines. And the purpose of this is to be able to attune to and be mindful of sensory gating as it's working. In other words, that as much as you attune to it, unless you're just someone who can go into the body and on a profound level, you'll experience how it's being gated out sensorially. So again, just starting now, we're going to go for 60 seconds. Okay. Now I just want to do a second part to this. And this has to do with our nervous system. Okay. And I'll keep it to the autonomic nervous system and the brainstem, and then the central nervous system down into the spine. right now, all of our body functions are being mediated through the autonomic and central nervous system. Okay. Now, again, and this goes to the brainstem down into the spine. I want you to just be aware of just literally where your brainstem and your spine is. And with that, to try to be aware of all of the body functions that we need to survive and to thrive, that all of the body functions are being controlled down to a cellular level by your brainstem and spine. And try to be aware of what it's doing and how it's doing it. We'll take another minute, minute and a half. Okay. I'm sure all of you had individual experiences, but I'm sure there was a commonality of experience for all of you. What you all just observed, and experienced mindfully was sensory gating. In other words, when in the first part, when you try to observe your circulation and your digestion, I'm not saying that you didn't observe anything, but I think you had a sense of how limited and how out of reach these internal processes are. And in other words, how much they are gated, sensorially gated. And the second part, in attuning to and attending to the autonomic and central nervous processes, I introduced it by talking about that it's doing everything down to a cellular level. Okay. You may have gone into a kind of mindful or meditative state. Okay. But it is virtually impossible. It's like sort of like a black box, for us in terms of being able to be aware of all these things as they go on. Again, by that we were experiencing, we were observing our system, gating itself sensorially. And from this, these are the same processes that I believe mediate dissociation. In other words, when that which would be too overwhelming for us to experience at a given time, especially when we're young, especially when we're very young, that it is the same process, this filtration process, that reveals our innate capacity to dissociate on as instinctual a level as the autonomic processes and the central nervous processes. Okay, so I want you to just sort of let yourself hold both at the same time, or go from one to the other, okay, to understand the dissociation from a sensory gating point of view. And I want you to be aware of yourself and also your clients, and to understand their dissociative processes just from the exercise that we have done. So I want you to choose one client who you understand to be highly dissociative, whether they have had a highly articulated part system that has revealed itself to you or not. But I want you to now think about and remember yourself with this client, or imagine yourself with this client right now, and just sort of tune in to their dissociative processes, just coming off of these exercises from a sensory gating point of view. And how it's almost magical that sensory gating makes something disappear or takes something that's there and prevents you from being able to sense it on any level, any of our five senses. So just put yourself in from a memory point of view, or from an imaginal point of view, with a highly dissociative client, holding the awareness of the sensory gating exercises we just went through. For about a minute, and just watch whatever happens. And for the last 30 seconds, just to connect and be mindful of how the sensory gating for the client that you just experienced is how the dissociative processes work. And it's what the dissociative processes feel like, or on some level don't feel like, because, you know, it's gated out. Okay. I just did, by the way, I'm saying this to you, I'm saying this to everybody. This exercise that we just did this morning on sensory gating and dissociation and everything, I've never done it before with any group. This is the first time I've done it. You know, it's, you might assume that I had, because of how profound it is and how germane it is to this training. In fact, it only fully formed for me about 45 minutes before I went on the training. Okay. But the purpose of this was for us to be able to have an experience of how sensory gating actually works inside of us. Okay. So that we could then bring forward, translate, extrapolate the nature of sensory gating in the dissociative processes. Then bringing that, because that's bringing that out from digestion and circulation, bring that up to the autonomic and the central nervous system functions, and having a sort of attuned to that,
Mm.
and then bringing that forward in terms of understanding ourselves, our own dissociative processes, and of course our clients as we sit with them.
Mm.
And I was thinking that this is both, this is an exercise that looks through the Western science lens
Mm.
at the same time as it's looking through the global science wisdom lens. And then just, so on the one hand, to me, the idea that evidence-based practice is the science of psychotherapy or psychology, if it doesn't even know and doesn't recognize the science, the physiology of our filtration systems, and how central that is to what is called our psychological processes. If that basic piece of science that may be more central than anything else is not recognized by the community in our field that says that they have the science, they have the information, then that's another interesting piece. So, and any or all of that, Mark?
Yeah, fascinating. So much there to comment into, but I'll try and just keep it succinct. But evidence-based practice, what is that anyway? And what is that in relation to practice-based evidence? And
I never thought of that before. That's brilliant. I'm going to write that down.
Well, it's something that I'm often reminded, has been done by many cultures for a lot longer. The practice-based evidence, and it comes right back for me, to something like yoga. Yoga doesn't mean standing in a certain position, a certain pose, a certain asana. Yoga is a yoke, it's a connection. Nowadays, we'd probably call it introception. But yoga is that sense of really connecting the whole brain by, like you were showing us there to do, by being aware, an awareness of the gating that we create to make us survive on this planet in the way that we've been conditioned to survive. So we get rid of a lot of our experiences in doing so. And now for a good, well over 2,000 years, I think it was Sri Patanjali wrote the Yoga Sutra, which is something like 139 Yoga Sutra, which are all about what we're talking about here. They're all about recognizing the gating, being aware of it and noticing it. And it might be in a weird or a little sensation when we're in a certain position in asana, but it's kind of opening up and going back inside. And I remember sitting with some wonderful gurus in Hridaya yoga and meditation that spent their whole lives doing what you just showed us to do there, focusing into their hearts, Hridaya meaning the heart center. And eventually you might feel a very gentle flutter in your heart. And they tell me it takes years before this happens. But we were just kind of coming back into the system, into this awareness. And I love it because, just following on from this sort of sense of being gating, well, it reminds me of the brain studies. When we kind of have an arousal or an excitatory network in the brain, to do that, we have to have an inhibited part, another part of the brain. There's always an interrelationship between the 1 and the 0, the on and the off, to simplify in sort of technical terms. So when we're gating something out, we're also gating something in, would be my hypothesis. And when I was doing that lovely exercise that you were walking us through there, and I noticed as I was trying to go into my heart, which is my chosen place of focus right there. And when I was dissociating or gating out from my heart, I was noticing what I was gating in, and it was all these thoughts about the group and the technical and the recording and blah, blah, blah. And it's interesting because if we're gating in something in therapy, if we're gating in talk, if we're gating in speech, then the therapeutic modality in itself is gating out the somatic, the deep sensations that we've learned to dissociate from. And it's reinforcing that. And just one last point on this, because you did ask, so I'm on a roll now. I'm in my flow. With this, the kind of what the truth or authenticity, when you go back into Latin terms, there's a word called verum. Verum is kind of meaning the kind of the truth, or as things are. And the definition of that, if you go to the etymology of it, It's not what's included, it's what's excluded. Truth comes from discovering, not covering, discovering, the removal of something or unconcealing something. So again, the prefix indicates to us that you're taking away something to discover something. And I think this is what I love in terms of this work that we're doing today, and this experiment you just got us to do there for that process, is what we're doing is we're discovering, we're removing something that's become excited and inhibiting it so that we can access something that's become gated or dissociated out of conscious awareness.
Mm-hmm.
The power of when we do that with our clients as they're dissociated and we're in our bodies and in our sensations with them, in the co-regulatory resonance, I believe is the most profound tool we have. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You just covered so much territory that had about 5 comments, and I can't like retrieve them all at the same time. This is the kind of thinking we need to be doing. These are the kind of discussions we need to be having. Okay. And instead of going away from the Western ideas, I think we need to expand the Western ideas as well as accessing the global wisdom. But by the way, talking about in yoga and what yogis do and the deepest meditators, the people who meditate many hours every day, who are able to slow down their heart rates, who literally can control their heart rates. They can do that which is autonomic, which we're not supposed to be able to do. The only way I believe that can happen is that they get more and more access to the autonomic nervous system. I've always looked at the brainstem as being, again, most of it is filtered out from us, but I've looked at the spine, and again, the brainstem, we talk about the brainstem, then we talk about the spine when they're like one, but the deeper you go down from the brainstem into the spine, to me, it becomes more and more out of reach. I call it like a black box where perhaps you can't access it in any way. But perhaps the meditators and the yogis and the people doing yoga who do this, perhaps not only can they access, not fully, but just even slightly, the brainstem, maybe they're accessing what I call that black box of the spine and the spinal processes. What do you think about that, Mark?
I think very much so. And what I'd say in experiencing something that's in a black box, not to expect to experience it through the interpretation tools that we experience other things like thought and language.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
The moment you do that, you lose all capacity or possibility of doing that.
Yeah. That's it. So, and plant medicine has been a good teacher for me in this. When you really are going through the levels and experiencing something that's so out there, don't expect it to come to you in forms of human forms or in word or verbal forms. Often it's as I was talking about, sort of the discovery comes through the absence of the noise, and the noise is often the verbal and the thinking stuff. So if you are really experiencing to the black box of your spine, experience it as it is without having to know what it is. As soon as you're trying to know what it is, that's taking you out of the experience itself.
Right. You can't know it. You can only experience it. Afterwards, after the experience is over, then you can reflect on it. But the moment you reflect on it during the experience is over.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to that episode. And if you're curious to find out more about this guest of the show, then please see their links below. Thank you for joining me for Awe in Trauma. Until next time, bye-bye.